I'm Daniel, 52. My son told his friends at a fancy dinner, "My dad's a nobody. He'll never understand success." They laughed, proud of him. I smiled and said, "That's what you think." I stood up, left the dinner, and started building. Months later, he saw what I built and sent a message that made my breath catch. Before I tell you how it happened, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. The restaurant was one of those places where they charge $40 for a steak, and the waiters wear vests that cost more than my first car. Crystal glasses catching the light, leather banquettes that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. My son Marcus had chosen it specifically. I knew that now. He wanted his friends to see him in this setting, wanted the backdrop to match the story he was telling about himself. I sat there listening to these kids, and at 24 they were still kids to me, talk about their startups and their funding rounds and their exit strategies. All borrowed language, borrowed confidence. They threw around numbers like confetti, talked about disruption like it was a religion. Marcus was right there with them, nodding along, adding his own flourishes to conversations about markets he'd never worked in, customers he'd never served. But here's what killed me, what still makes my chest tight when I think about it. I'd spent 28 years building something real, 28 years of getting up at 5 a.m. to work on client proposals before my day job, 28 years of weekend consulting calls, of studying at night while Marcus slept, of saying no to vacations and new cars and restaurant dinners like this one, so I could invest every spare dollar back into the business. I'd paid off our house in 15 years instead of 30, not because I made a fortune, but because I worked 2 jobs and lived like we made half what we did. I'd built a consulting practice that might not have been flashy, but it was solid. Real clients, real problems, real solutions. The kind of work that kept the lights on for small businesses in our town, that helped family restaurants survive the pandemic, that turned around failing retail shops. My office wasn't in some glass tower downtown. It was in the converted garage behind our house, with a space heater in winter and a box fan in summer. But from that garage, I'd created something that mattered, something that lasted, something that put food on tables besides my own. And there was Marcus, in his tailored shirt that I'd probably paid for indirectly, surrounded by friends whose respect he was trying to buy with clever put-downs of the man who'd made it all possible. The problem with our parents' generation, one of his friends was saying, Blake, I think his name was, kid with slicked back hair and a watch that cost more than my car, is they think small, they're scared to scale. Exactly, Marcus jumped in, and I could hear the excitement in his voice, the way he always got when he thought he was being particularly insightful. My dad's been doing the same consulting thing for decades, same clients, same approach. He could be making millions, but he thinks like it's still 1995. They all laughed. Not cruel laughter exactly, but the kind of dismissive chuckling you hear when people think they're in on some joke that the rest of the world doesn't get. The kind of laughter that says, "We know better." "Has he ever even tried to modernize?" asked another one. Sarah, who I'd met exactly twice and who'd spent both meetings looking at her phone. "Like, does he have a LinkedIn?" More laughter. "Oh, he's got a LinkedIn," Marcus said, and I could hear the quote marks around his words. 3 connections. His profile picture is from 2019. His tagline is something like, "Practical solutions for real businesses." It's so earnest. The word hit me like a slap. Earnest. Like that was something to be ashamed of. "The thing is," Marcus continued, and I realized he was warming up to something bigger, something he'd been thinking about. He's got this whole client base that trusts him, right? But he has no idea how to leverage that. No idea how to build systems, create passive income, scale beyond trading time for money. It's honestly painful to watch. "Couldn't you help him?" Blake asked. "I mean, you understand growth strategies." And this is where it got interesting. Because Marcus leaned forward, lowered his voice just a little, like he was sharing something confidential. "I've been thinking about that, actually. Like, what if we could take what he's built, The relationships, the reputation, and actually turn it into something significant? Modernize the whole operation? Bring it into this century? Like a hostile takeover of your dad's business? Sarah laughed. Not hostile, Marcus said quickly. More like a gentle evolution. He's not getting any younger, you know. Someone's going to have to take over eventually. Might as well be someone who understands how to actually build wealth in the modern economy. I felt something cold settle in my stomach, because I was starting to understand what I was hearing. This wasn't just casual mockery. This was planning. The contacts alone are probably worth 6 figures if you work them right, another friend chimed in. David, I think. Small business owners always need help, and if you can position yourself as the next generation solution. Exactly, Marcus said. And the best part is, it's not like I'd be competing with him. I'd be upgrading him, taking what he built and making it actually profitable. Your dad would probably be grateful, Blake added. I mean, once he sees the numbers you could generate with his client list. The client list. My client list. 28 years of relationships built one conversation at a time, one solved problem at a time, one kept promise at a time, and Marcus was talking about it like it was some kind of inheritance he was entitled to claim. But what really got to me, what made my hands shake under the table, was how matter-of-fact they all sounded. Like this was just obvious business strategy. Like the 2.5 decades I'd spent building trust and expertise were just raw materials waiting to be optimized by someone with a better understanding of modern growth tactics. The hard part, Marcus was saying, would be transitioning the clients without making them feel abandoned. You'd have to rebrand the whole thing gradually, maybe keep him involved as like a figurehead, while you actually run the operations. Like emeritus status, Sarah suggested. Honored founder, but not actually making decisions. Right, and honestly, he'd probably prefer that. Less stress, less responsibility. He could finally relax. They had it all figured out. My semi-retirement, my gradual fade into irrelevance, my graceful acceptance of being managed by my son, who understood things I apparently couldn't grasp, all presented as a favor they'd be doing me. I sat there listening to them carve up my life's work like it was a turkey at Thanksgiving, and I realized something that probably should have been obvious years earlier. Marcus didn't respect what I'd built because he didn't understand what I'd built. He saw the surface, the modest office, the steady income, the same clients year after year, and he missed everything that mattered. He missed the restaurant owner who called me crying at midnight when she thought she'd have to close during the pandemic, and how we spent 6 hours on the phone working through a survival strategy that saved 8 jobs. He missed the retail store that was hemorrhaging money until we restructured their inventory system and turned them profitable in 4 months. He missed the nonprofit that was about to lose their grants until I helped them reorganize their reporting structure. He saw small, I saw sustainable. He saw stagnant, I saw stable. He saw old-fashioned, I saw proven. But here's what really broke something inside me. He was planning to take it, not earn it, not learn it, not build on it with respect for what came before. Take it, rebrand it, improve it, make it worthy of his attention. The messaging would be key, Blake was saying. You'd want to position it as innovation, not replacement. Taking the family business to the next level, or something like that. Traditional wisdom, modern execution, David suggested. Ooh, I like that, Sarah said. Generational excellence could be good too. They were writing marketing copy for my obsolescence, and Marcus was nodding along like this was the most natural thing in the world. That's when he turned to me. Dad, you've been quiet. What do you think about all this? The table went silent, 6 pairs of eyes looking at me expectantly. Marcus with this confident smile, like he was sure I'd be impressed by their strategic thinking. His friends trying to look respectful while barely concealing their amusement at being asked to include the old man in their conversation about the future. I looked around the table, at the crystal glasses and the $40 steaks and the kids who thought they'd figured out in 4 years what I'd spent 3 decades learning. At my son, who'd just spent 20 minutes explaining to his friends how he planned to rescue me from my own limitations, and I smiled. Not because I was happy, because something had clicked into place, some decision I didn't even know I'd been considering. "That's what you think," I said. The smile on Marcus's face flickered just a little. "What do you mean?" I stood up, dropped my napkin on the table. "Enjoy your dinner. I have work to do." The silence that followed me out was worth every penny I'd spent on that meal, but walking away was the easy part. What came next? That's where things got interesting. I drove home in complete silence. No radio, no phone calls, no podcast to distract me from what I was thinking. Just me and the road, and the slow burn of 28 years of work being dismissed as quaint and outdated by someone who'd never built anything more complex than a PowerPoint presentation. The first thing I did when I got home was lock my office. Physical lock, change the code on the digital lock, the whole thing. Then I spent 3 hours backing up every file, every contact, every piece of intellectual property I'd developed over the past 3 decades. Client lists, process documents, templates, methodologies, everything went onto encrypted drives that I locked in a safety deposit box the next morning. But that was just defense. What I was really doing, as I sat there at 2 a.m. surrounded by bankers' boxes and backup drives, was grieving, not just for the relationship with my son, though that hurt more than I want to admit, but for something I hadn't even realized I'd lost, the assumption that the work itself mattered, that building something real and sustainable and helpful was enough, that you didn't have to scale and optimize and disrupt to be worthy of respect. I'd spent 30 years believing that if you did good work, if you solved real problems for real people, if you built trust one conversation at a time, that meant something. And maybe it did mean something. But not to the people whose opinions I'd somehow started caring about. That's when the first message came in. A DM on LinkedIn, of all places. The same LinkedIn that Marcus had mocked for its earnestness. From Blake, the kid with the expensive watch and the slicked-back hair. "Hey, Mr. Chen," it started. "Hope you're not upset about tonight. Just wanted you to know that Marcus really looks up to you, even if it didn't sound like it at dinner. We were just brainstorming ways to help modernize your business. No disrespect intended." I stared at that message for maybe 10 minutes. Help modernize my business, like it was broken and needed fixing, like 28 years of steady growth and satisfied clients was somehow a problem to be solved. I deleted it without responding, but then, an hour later, another message came in. This one from David, the one who'd suggested traditional wisdom, modern execution, as a slogan for my own displacement. "Mr. Chen, I hope we didn't overstep tonight. Marcus has shared so much about your business over the years, and we all have a lot of respect for what you've built. If you're ever interested in exploring growth opportunities, I'd love to buy you coffee and share some ideas. I think there's real potential to scale what you're doing." Scale what I'm doing. There it was again. The assumption that bigger was automatically better, that success was measured purely in revenue growth and market expansion. I deleted that one too. But the third message, that one stopped me cold. It was from Marcus himself, sent at 3:17 a.m. "Dad, I think there was some miscommunication tonight. When we were talking about helping you modernize the business, I didn't mean to imply that what you've built isn't valuable. I just think there are opportunities you might not be seeing. Can we talk tomorrow? I have some ideas that could really benefit both of us." Benefit both of us. Like he was doing me a favor by explaining how my life's work could be improved by someone who'd never run a business, never dealt with a difficult client, never stayed up until 2 a.m. trying to solve a cash flow problem for someone else's company. I closed my laptop without responding, but I couldn't sleep. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in years. I pulled out a legal pad and started writing. Not client proposals or project plans or process documentation, just thoughts, questions. What did I actually want? Did I want to scale? Did I want to modernize? Did I want to build something bigger and flashier and more impressive to people like Blake and David and Sarah? Or did I want something else entirely? By morning, I had 17 pages of notes, and buried in all that writing, scattered across pages of frustrated rambling and defensive arguments with imaginary critics, was something that looked like a plan. Not a plan to modernize or scale or optimize, a plan to double down, to build something so undeniably valuable, so obviously successful, so completely legitimate that no one, not Marcus, not his friends, not the whole cult of growth at all costs thinking, could dismiss it as small-time or outdated. I was going to show them what real business looked like. The call came at 7 a.m. Jane Martinez, the woman who cleaned the office building where I used to rent space downtown before I moved the business home. She'd been trying to start her own cleaning service for 3 years, but couldn't get the financing or the insurance or the client base to make it work. "Mr. Chen," she said, and I could hear the exhaustion in her voice. "I know you don't do startups, but I'm desperate. I've got 2 kids and my husband's been out of work for 6 months. If I can't make this business work in the next 90 days, we're going to lose the apartment." 3 years ago, I would have referred her to someone who specialized in service businesses, would have given her some basic advice and wished her well, would have stayed in my lane. But sitting there at 7 a.m. with 17 pages of notes about what I actually wanted to build, I heard myself saying something different. "Come over this morning. Bring every piece of paperwork you have. Financial statements, insurance quotes, client prospects, everything. We're going to figure this out." "I can't afford your consulting rates," she said quickly. "We'll figure that out too." She was at my door by 9 a.m. with a cardboard box full of documents and a notebook with 3 years' worth of business plans written in careful handwriting. We spent 4 hours at my kitchen table going through everything, and by the end of it, I could see exactly what needed to happen. Her business model was sound, her pricing was competitive, her service quality was exceptional. I'd seen her work for years. What she didn't have was systems, scheduling software, invoicing processes, client management, insurance navigation, tax planning. All the boring, invisible infrastructure that turns good work into sustainable business. "Here's what we're going to do," I told her. "I'm going to spend the next 2 weeks building you a complete business operations system. Scheduling, invoicing, client management, the works. Custom built for a cleaning service, tested and proven. In exchange, you're going to let me document the whole process and use your business as a case study." A case study for what? That's when I realized I was building something I didn't even have a name for yet. For proving that small businesses don't need to be big businesses to be successful businesses. Over the next 2 weeks, while Marcus left increasingly confused voicemails asking when we were going to have that conversation about growth opportunities, I built Jane Martinez the kind of business infrastructure that most consultants charge $50,000 to develop. Automated scheduling that synced with her phone, invoicing software that tracked payment cycles and sent automatic reminders, a client management system that helped her track preferences and special requests, insurance and bonding guidance that cut her costs by 30%. But more than that, I built her confidence, showed her how to price her services based on value, not desperation, taught her how to have difficult conversations with clients who tried to expand the scope without expanding the payment, walked her through the tax implications of different business structures. By the end of month 1, she'd tripled her client base. By the end of month 2, she'd hired her first employee. By the end of month 3, she was booked solid and turning down work. And that's when the message arrived that changed everything. It was from Tommy Rodriguez, a kid I'd mentored 5 years ago when he was struggling to keep his family's auto repair shop open after his father died. The same Tommy who'd sent me a Christmas card every year with pictures of his growing family and updates on the business. "Mr. Chen," the message said, "I heard through the grapevine that you helped Jane Martinez set up her cleaning business. Is that true? Because if you're doing that kind of work now, I have about 6 friends who could use exactly that kind of help. Real businesses, real problems, real people who just need someone to show them how to build the boring stuff that makes everything else work. Let me know." 6 friends turned into 12. 12 turned into 24. A landscaper who was losing jobs because he couldn't track his estimates. A food truck operator who was getting killed by inefficient routes and poor inventory management. A wedding photographer who was talented as hell but couldn't manage the business side to save her life. A contractor who could build anything but couldn't invoice properly or manage cash flow. All of them small, all of them local, all of them exactly the kind of businesses that Marcus and his friends would probably dismiss as unscalable, and every single one of them was a problem I knew how to solve. That's when I realized what I was actually building, not a consulting practice. I already had one of those. Not a scalable business model. That's what everyone else was chasing. I was building proof of concept, evidence. A demonstration that small, sustainable, profitable businesses weren't some quaint relic of a bygone era, but the backbone of every healthy economy. 3 months after that dinner, I had 15 active clients. Not Fortune 500 companies or venture-backed startups or anyone that Blake and David would be impressed by. Just real people running real businesses, making real money, employing real employees, solving real problems in their communities. My average project fee was $12,000. My average project duration was 6 weeks. My client satisfaction rate was 100% because I only took on projects where I was absolutely certain I could deliver transformational results. The math was pretty simple. 15 clients at $12,000 each, twice a year. $360,000 in annual revenue, working maybe 30 hours a week, with a client base that generated referrals faster than I could handle them. But the real breakthrough came when I realized I was documenting everything wrong. Instead of creating custom solutions for each client, I was starting to see patterns. The systems Jane needed for her cleaning business weren't that different from what the landscaper needed, or the contractor, or even the food truck operator. The problems were different, but the infrastructure requirements were almost identical. So I started building templates. Modular systems that could be adapted for different industries but shared the same core framework. Scheduling systems that worked for service businesses. Invoicing processes that worked for project-based companies. Client management tools that worked for anyone who needed to track relationships over time. And then I started teaching other consultants how to use them. That's when things got really interesting. The first workshop I ran was supposed to be for 12 people. I booked the community room at the library, figuring that would be plenty of space for a Saturday morning session on sustainable systems for small business consultants. 47 people showed up. They weren't all consultants either. There were accountants and lawyers and freelancers and business coaches. There were retired executives who wanted to do meaningful work without corporate politics. There were people who'd been laid off from big companies and were trying to figure out how to monetize their expertise. There were small business owners who wanted to learn how to solve their own problems instead of hiring someone else to do it. What they all had in common was exhaustion, with the scale or fail mentality that seemed to dominate every business conversation. They were tired of being told that if your business wasn't growing by 20% year over year, you were failing. Tired of being told that if you weren't raising capital or building teams or expanding markets, you weren't thinking big enough. They wanted to build something sustainable, something profitable, something that didn't require 60-hour weeks or constant stress or sacrificing their health and relationships for the promise of eventual freedom. They wanted what I'd been building for 28 years, except they wanted to do it intentionally instead of accidentally. So I started teaching them. Not just the technical systems, anybody could learn invoicing software and scheduling tools. I taught them the philosophy. How to price based on value instead of hours, how to choose clients who appreciated expertise instead of discounting everything, how to build businesses that served their lives instead of consuming them. The waiting list for the next workshop was 86 people. That's when I knew I had something bigger than a consulting practice. I had a movement, but I still hadn't heard from Marcus. 6 months after that dinner, I was running workshops twice a month, had a waiting list of over 200 people, and had helped launch 43 profitable small businesses. The local newspaper wanted to do a feature story. The Chamber of Commerce asked me to speak at their annual conference. 3 different business schools reached out about developing curriculum around sustainable business practices. And then Marcus called. "Dad," he said, and I could hear something different in his voice. Less confidence, more confusion. "I've been hearing some interesting things about what you're doing. Blake's dad mentioned that you spoke at his Rotary Club last month, said you got a standing ovation talking about sustainable business practices." I waited. "And David's mom apparently came to one of your workshops? She said it was amazing that you helped her restructure her bookkeeping practice and doubled her income in 3 months." Still waiting. "I guess I'm wondering, why didn't you tell me about any of this?" There it was. The question I'd been expecting for months. "You told me I was small-time," I said. "You told me I didn't understand modern success. You told your friends I was stuck in 1995, so I decided to show you what 1995 looks like when it's done right." Silence on the other end of the line. "Dad, that's not... I mean, we were just brainstorming ways to help you grow the business. We didn't mean to insult what you'd built." "Marcus, you spent 20 minutes at that dinner explaining to your friends how you could take over my client list and rebrand my life's work to make it actually profitable. You called me earnest like it was a dirty word. You planned my semi-retirement without asking if I wanted to retire." More silence. "I've been building something for 6 months," I continued. "Not scaling your version of my business. Building my version of my business. And turns out, when you do that with intention instead of apology, when you stop trying to be impressive to people who don't understand the work, when you focus on being valuable instead of being big, pretty amazing things happen." "What kind of amazing things?" So I told him. About Jane and Tommy and the 47 people who showed up to that first workshop. About the waiting lists and the standing ovations in the business schools. About the 15 clients who were generating more revenue than I'd ever seen, working fewer hours than I'd worked in decades. "How much revenue?" he asked, and I could hear the spreadsheet in his brain spinning up. 600,000 this year, probably going to hit 800,000 next year without adding a single hour to my work week. The silence that followed was longer than any of the previous silences. "Dad," he finally said, "I think I owe you an apology." "You don't owe me an apology," I told him. "You owe yourself some thinking time about what success actually looks like and whether the people whose approval you're chasing have actually built anything worth respecting." But that conversation, as satisfying as it was, wasn't the real victory. The real victory came 2 weeks later, when I got a call from Blake's father, Richard Hartman, senior partner at one of the biggest law firms downtown. The same Blake who'd mocked my LinkedIn profile and suggested I needed help understanding scale. "Mr. Chen," he said, "my son mentioned that you've been doing some interesting work with small business development. I'm wondering if we could talk. Our firm has been struggling with efficiency issues for years. We're profitable, but our processes are a mess. Client management, billing, project tracking. We've hired 3 different consulting firms, spent over $200,000, and somehow we're less efficient than when we started." I let him talk for 10 minutes about their problems. Overcomplicated software systems that nobody used properly. Billing processes that took weeks to complete. Client communications that fell through cracks. Projects that started without clear scope and ended with frustrated clients and unpaid invoices. All problems I could solve in about 6 weeks. "What would something like that cost?" he asked. $45,000, I said, plus a case study agreement that lets me document the process and use it to teach other professional service firms. That's significantly less than what we paid the last firm. That's because I'm not trying to impress you with complexity. I'm trying to solve your problems with simplicity. He hired me that afternoon, but the best part wasn't the money or even the satisfaction of working with Blake's father after Blake had dismissed my approach as outdated. The best part was what happened when Blake found out. Marcus called me laughing. "Dad, you're not going to believe this. Blake just called me freaking out because his father hired you to reorganize their entire firm. Apparently, Blake spent the last 6 months telling his dad that small business consultants don't understand enterprise-level problems." "What did you tell him?" I told him that maybe enterprise-level problems are just small business problems that got overcomplicated by people who charge enterprise-level fees. That's when I knew something had shifted, not just in my business, but in how Marcus thought about business. But the real test came at the Founders Forum. Every quarter, the Regional Business Development Council hosted a forum where local entrepreneurs presented their companies to potential investors, partners, and collaborators. It was exactly the kind of event that Marcus and his friends would consider legitimate. Real business people talking about real growth strategies with real numbers. I'd never presented before, never had a reason to. My consulting practice wasn't looking for investors or partners, and I'd never thought of what I did as presentation-worthy. But after 9 months of building something that was starting to look less like a consulting practice and more like a movement, the forum organizers reached out. "We'd love to have you present," the email said. "We've been hearing amazing things about your work with sustainable business practices, and we think our audience would be very interested in your approach." The presentation was scheduled for 20 minutes. I spent 3 weeks preparing, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I'd never tried to explain what I'd been building to an audience of people who were trained to think in terms of scale and exit strategies. How do you explain to a room full of growth-focused entrepreneurs that sometimes the best strategy is to stay small? How do you make a case for sustainability to people who've been conditioned to value disruption above everything else? I decided to lead with numbers. "My name is Daniel Chen," I started. 9 months ago, I had a consulting practice that generated about $180,000 a year working 50 hours a week. Today, I have a business that will generate over $800,000 this year working 30 hours a week, with a waiting list of over 300 people and a client satisfaction rate of 100%. I didn't raise capital, hire employees, or scale operations. I just stopped apologizing for being small and started being excellent instead. The room was quiet. Not the polite quiet of people waiting for the real presentation to start, but the focused quiet of people doing math in their heads. "Here's what I did differently," I continued, and clicked to the first slide. Instead of trying to solve bigger problems for more impressive clients, I focused on solving the same problems better for the clients I already understood. Instead of building systems that could theoretically scale to serve thousands of businesses, I built systems that definitely worked for dozens of businesses. Instead of chasing trends and buzzwords and the approval of people who'd never built anything, I doubled down on boring, proven, profitable practices. I clicked to my final slide, which showed a simple comparison chart. Traditional scaling approach: raise capital, hire fast, expand quickly, optimize later. Average business lifespan, 3.2 years. Average owner income in year 3, $47,000. Average stress level, high. Sustainable building approach: start profitable, grow deliberately, optimize continuously. Average business lifespan, 12 plus years. Average owner income in year 3, $85,000. Average stress level, manageable. I looked up at the room. Questions? The first question came from Jennifer Walsh, who ran a marketing agency that specialized in working with tech startups. "This is interesting," she said, "but don't you worry about leaving money on the table? I mean, if your systems work so well, couldn't you scale them to serve thousands of businesses instead of dozens?" I'd been expecting this question for months. "Jennifer, let me ask you something. How many of your startup clients are still in business 2 years after you finish working with them?" She paused. That's hard to track, because the market conditions change so quickly. How many? Maybe 30%? So 70% of your clients fail within 2 years of hiring you. Now, I'm sure that's not your fault. Startup failure rates are brutal no matter how good the marketing is. But let me ask you this. If you could choose between serving 1,000 clients where 700 fail, or serving 100 clients where all 100 succeed, which would you choose? She didn't answer immediately. "Because that's the choice I made," I continued. "I could probably scale my systems to serve thousands of businesses, but I'd have to make them more generic, less customized, less effective. I'd have to hire people who didn't have my experience or expertise. I'd have to spend more time managing scale and less time solving problems. And at the end of it, I'd probably have a bigger business that helped fewer people. The second question came from Marcus. I hadn't seen him come in. He was sitting in the back row, wearing the same confident expression I'd seen at that dinner 9 months ago, but something was different about his posture. "Dad," he said, and the room got very quiet very quickly. "This is impressive, really impressive, but I'm wondering about succession planning. What happens to all this knowledge and these systems when you retire? Doesn't the model depend too heavily on you personally?" It was a good question, a fair question, and exactly the question I'd hoped someone would ask. "Marcus, 3 months ago I had the same concern. So I started training other consultants to use these systems. Not employees, independent consultants who wanted to build their own sustainable practices using proven methods." I clicked to a new slide that I'd added just for this possibility. I've now trained 37 consultants in 12 states. Each one is building their own practice, serving their own local market, using systems that work. Each one is generating an average of $6,000 per month within their first 6 months, working an average of 20 hours per week. And each one is documenting their results and contributing improvements back to the system. I looked directly at Marcus. So to answer your question about succession planning, I'm not building something that depends on me. I'm building something that teaches other people to build things that don't depend on me either. The room was completely quiet. "That's not scaling in the traditional sense," I continued. "It's replication. Instead of one big business serving thousands of clients, it's dozens of small businesses, each serving dozens of clients, all using the same underlying principles but adapted to local markets and personal strengths." A hand went up in the middle of the room. Tom Bradley, who owned a chain of 3 hardware stores and was always talking about expansion plans and regional dominance. "Daniel, this sounds great in theory, but don't you worry about competition? I mean, if you're training other consultants to do what you do, aren't you creating competitors for yourself?" I smiled. "Tom, let me ask you something. How many hardware stores does this town need?" "Well, there are 5 of us currently, and we all seem to do okay." "Right, because the market is big enough to support multiple businesses doing similar work. As long as each business does good work and serves their customers well. The same thing applies to what I do. There are thousands of small businesses in our region that need help with systems and processes. Even if all 37 of the consultants I've trained were working in the same city, which they're not, there would still be more demand than we could handle." I clicked to another slide. "But here's the thing that's more important than competition. When you teach someone to build a sustainable business, you're not just creating a competitor. You're creating a collaborator. Every consultant I've trained refers clients to me when they encounter problems outside their expertise. I refer clients to them when I'm at capacity, or when someone needs help, I'm not the best person to provide. So instead of competing with each other, you're building a network that makes everyone stronger?" "Exactly. Which, by the way, is exactly how healthy local economies work. Small businesses supporting each other, referring to each other, collaborating when it makes sense, competing when it improves service." The questions continued for another 15 minutes. Technical questions about the systems I'd built, philosophical questions about the sustainable business model, practical questions about how to transition from growth-focused to sustainability-focused thinking. But the question that mattered most came from Blake. He was sitting 3 rows from the front, looking uncomfortable in his expensive suit. And when he raised his hand, I could see his father sitting 2 seats away, watching with interest. "Mr. Chen," Blake said, and his voice had none of the confident dismissiveness I remembered from that dinner. "I owe you an apology. When we had that conversation at dinner last year, I think I completely misunderstood what you were building. I thought small meant limited, but what you're describing sounds more ambitious than most of the startups I know." He paused, looked around the room, then continued. "I guess I'm wondering, Do you have any advice for someone who's been thinking about business completely backwards? The room was so quiet I could hear the air conditioning cycling on. Blake, I said, the first piece of advice is to stop thinking of ambition and scale as the same thing. Ambition means building something meaningful that lasts. Scale is just one possible tool for achieving that, and it's not always the right tool. I looked around the room, making eye contact with as many people as possible. The second piece of advice is to get very clear about what success actually means to you, not what it means to other people. If success means building a $100 million company that you can sell in 5 years, then sustainable small business practices probably aren't for you. But if success means building something profitable and meaningful that provides a good living while solving real problems for real people, then maybe it's worth reconsidering some assumptions. I clicked to my final slide, which just had one sentence. Excellence doesn't need to be enormous to be enough. And the third piece of advice, I said, is to remember that the most successful businesses in human history have been small businesses. The restaurant that's been serving the same neighborhood for 30 years, the accounting firm that's handled 3 generations of the same families, the contractor who's built half the houses in town. These businesses don't make headlines, but they make communities. They don't disrupt industries, but they serve customers. They don't scale exponentially, but they last. The applause started slowly from the back of the room, but it built quickly. Not the polite applause you get at the end of most presentations, but the sustained applause that means people heard something that mattered to them. And as I looked out at that room, at Tom Bradley nodding thoughtfully, at Jennifer Walsh taking notes, at Blake looking like he was reconsidering some fundamental assumptions, I realized something important. I wasn't just building a business anymore. I was building proof of concept for a different way of thinking about business. Not the only way, not the right way for everyone, but a legitimate way that deserved to be part of the conversation. But the moment that really mattered came after the presentation, when I was packing up my laptop and getting ready to leave. Marcus approached the front of the room, walking slowly, hands in his pockets. "Dad," he said when he reached the stage, "can we talk?" We found a quiet corner of the lobby, away from the networking conversations and business card exchanges still happening in the main room. "I owe you more than an apology," he said. "I owe you, I don't know what I owe you. Understanding, maybe? Respect?" I waited. When we had that dinner last year, I thought I knew what success looked like. I thought bigger was automatically better, that growth was the only measure that mattered, that anything that didn't scale was somehow limited or small-minded. He sat down heavily in one of the lobby chairs. "And then I spent 9 months watching you build something that completely contradicted everything I thought I knew about business. Something that made more money, served more people, and created more impact than anything I've ever been involved in. And you did it by doing the exact opposite of everything I thought was important." "Marcus," I said, "you weren't wrong about everything. Growth and scale are legitimate strategies for some businesses, in some situations, with some goals. You just assumed they were the only legitimate strategies." "But that's just it," he said. "I didn't just assume they were the only legitimate strategies. I assumed that anyone who wasn't using those strategies was failing to understand them. I assumed that if you weren't scaling, it was because you didn't know how, not because you'd chosen not to." He looked up at me. "I assumed you were stuck instead of smart." The lobby was emptying out around us. Most of the other presenters had finished their networking conversations and headed home. But I wasn't ready to leave yet. "Marcus, do you want to know the hardest part of the last 9 months?" He nodded. "It wasn't building the systems, or running the workshops, or even dealing with the skepticism from people who thought I was thinking too small. The hardest part was wondering if I was wrong. Wondering if you and Blake and David were right, and I really was just making excuses for not thinking bigger." I watched his face carefully. Because when someone you love tells you that what you've built isn't impressive enough, it makes you question everything, even when you know, logically, that what you've built works and matters and helps people. "Dad, I never meant—" "I know you didn't mean to hurt me, but you did." Not because you criticized the business, but because you dismissed the values behind the business without trying to understand them. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. What values? He finally asked. Sustainability over growth, service over scale, excellence over expansion, the idea that a business should serve the life you want to live, not consume the life you have, the idea that profit is important, but it's not the only thing that's important. I stood up, started gathering my things. But here's what I learned in the process of proving you wrong. I wasn't just building a business. I was building a life. And the business I built reflects the life I want to live, not the life I think will impress other people. What kind of life is that? I thought about it for a moment. A life where I solve problems I understand for people I respect, where I work 30 hours a week instead of 60, where I make enough money to be comfortable without making so much money that managing it becomes a job in itself. A life where I teach other people to build sustainable things instead of competing with them to build bigger things. I looked at him directly. A life where I don't have to choose between being successful and being present for the people I care about. Marcus was quiet for a long time after that. Dad, he finally said, I think I want to learn how to build something like that. Something like what? Something sustainable. Something that serves people instead of just serving growth metrics. Something I can be proud of without having to convince other people to be impressed by it. I studied his face, trying to read whether this was genuine interest or just guilt-driven politeness. Marcus, learning to build sustainable businesses isn't like learning marketing tactics or growth strategies. It's not a skill set you can pick up in a weekend workshop. It's a completely different way of thinking about what business is for. What do you mean? I mean that most business education teaches you to build businesses that can exist without you, businesses that run on systems and processes and other people's labor, so you can extract profit without ongoing involvement. Sustainable business building is the opposite. It teaches you to build businesses that need you but don't consume you. Businesses where your expertise and judgment and relationships are essential, but where you're not working 60 hours a week to keep things running. I slung my laptop bag over my shoulder. It means choosing craft over scale, depth over breadth, quality over quantity. It means getting really good at saying no to opportunities that would make you more money but less happy. That sounds harder, actually. It is harder, because it requires you to know yourself well enough to know what you actually want, not just what you think you should want. And it requires you to build something based on your own values instead of building something that looks impressive to other people. We walked toward the parking garage together, not talking for a few minutes. Dad, Marcus said as we reached my car, would you be willing to teach me? I stopped walking. Teach you what exactly? How to build something sustainable. How to choose craft over scale. How to think about business the way you think about business. I looked at him carefully. Marcus, this isn't a side project you can explore while you're doing other things. If you want to learn to build sustainable businesses, you have to commit to building a sustainable business, which means starting small, growing slowly, focusing on service over profit for at least the first year. I know. It means working with clients who pay normal fees, not venture capital fees. It means solving boring problems really well instead of exciting problems adequately. It means measuring success in client satisfaction and personal fulfillment, not just revenue growth. I know. And it means that for the first year at least, you'd be working for free while you learn, because I'm not going to pay you to learn skills that you'll use to compete with me later. He smiled. Dad, after what I saw in that presentation, I'm not worried about competing with you. I'd be happy to collaborate with you. That's when I knew he was serious. All right, I said. But we're doing this my way. You start at the bottom with the boring stuff. Filing, data entry, client intake calls. You learn every system from the ground up before you touch anything client-facing. And if you get bored or frustrated or decide this isn't impressive enough for your friends, you leave without drama, and we don't talk about business again. Deal. We shook hands in the parking garage, and for the first time in 9 months, it felt like we were on the same team. But the real test came 3 months later. Marcus had been working with me for 12 weeks, doing exactly what I'd promised: boring, foundational work. He'd reorganized my client files, updated my contact database, built intake processes for new workshop attendees. He'd sat in on client calls without speaking, watched me run workshops without participating, read every piece of documentation I'd created over the past year, and he'd asked good questions, not flashy questions about scaling and automation and market expansion, but practical questions about why I'd chosen certain approaches over others, how I'd learned to price based on value instead of hours, what I'd learned from clients who hadn't been satisfied with my work. He was learning, but I wasn't sure he was learning the right things. That's when Sarah Matthews called. Sarah ran a boutique marketing firm that specialized in working with professional service companies, lawyers, accountants, consultants, architects. She'd been struggling for 2 years to systematize her client management processes and had hired 3 different consultants without getting results. "Daniel," she said, "I'm at the end of my rope. I've got great clients, good revenue, but I'm working 70 hours a week just keeping up with project management. If I can't figure out how to systematize this, I'm going to have to shut down." It was exactly the kind of project I'd normally take personally, complex enough to be interesting, important enough to matter, and well within my area of expertise. But as Sarah described her challenges, I realized something. This was also exactly the kind of project Marcus needed to see from the inside, not as an observer, but as a participant. "Sarah," I said, "I'd like to propose something different. Instead of me taking on this project personally, I'd like to have my associate take the lead, with me supervising and providing guidance as needed." Marcus looked up from his laptop, surprised. "Your associate has been working with me for 3 months," I continued, "learning these systems inside and out. This would be his first lead project, but he'd be working with proven methodologies and I'd be involved in every major decision." There was a pause. "What would that mean for pricing?" "Half my normal rate, with a guarantee that if you're not completely satisfied with the results, I'll personally redo the entire project at no additional cost." Another pause. "And your associate is qualified for this kind of work?" I looked at Marcus, who was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "He's got an MBA from Northwestern, 3 years of management consulting experience, and he's been studying my approach to small business systems for 12 weeks. More importantly, he's hungry to prove himself, and I'm invested in his success." "All right," Sarah said. "Let's try it." After I hung up, Marcus just looked at me for a long moment. "Dad," he finally said, "are you sure about this?" "No," I admitted. "But that's the point. In sustainable business building, you don't wait until you're sure. You wait until you're confident that you can deliver value, and then you learn the rest as you go." "What if I screw it up?" "Then I'll fix it, and we'll both learn something important about what you need to work on next." He nodded slowly. "What's the real reason you're doing this?" I thought about it. "Because the only way to learn to build something sustainable is to build something sustainable. You can't learn it by watching me do it, or by reading about it, or by talking about it in theory. You have to do it yourself, with real stakes and real consequences, and real clients who are counting on results." Exactly. The Sarah Matthews project took 8 weeks. 8 weeks of Marcus working 12-hour days, not because I required it, but because he was determined to get every detail right. 8 weeks of late-night phone calls where he walked me through his analysis and asked for guidance on decisions he wasn't confident about. 8 weeks of watching him develop the same obsessive attention to client success that had driven my own work for 3 decades. But more than that, 8 weeks of watching him learn to think like a craftsman instead of a growth strategist. The breakthrough moment came in week 5. Sarah's biggest challenge was managing client communications across multiple projects with overlapping timelines and competing priorities. Marcus had spent 3 weeks building elaborate project management systems and communication workflows, trying to create a solution that could handle every possible scenario. It wasn't working. The systems were too complex, the workflows were too rigid, and Sarah was spending more time managing the management systems than actually communicating with clients. That's when Marcus called me, frustrated and ready to quit. "Dad, I think I'm approaching this wrong. I keep trying to build systems that can handle everything automatically. But every time I think I've solved the problem, Sarah discovers a new situation that breaks the system. What do you think the problem is?" "I think the problem is that I'm still thinking like a consultant who wants to impress the client with sophisticated solutions, instead of thinking like a craftsman who wants to solve the client's actual problem." That was the moment I knew he was learning the right things. So what would a craftsman do differently? A craftsman would ask what Sarah actually needs, not what she thinks she needs. And what she actually needs isn't a system that can handle every possible communication scenario. What she needs is a simple system that handles the 90% of communications that are routine, plus a clear process for handling the 10% that are unusual. What would that look like? It would look like a really good inbox management system, plus a weekly client check-in call, plus clear guidelines for when to escalate unusual situations. Nothing fancy, nothing automated, nothing that requires training or ongoing maintenance. Try it. He did. The simple approach worked perfectly. Sarah went from spending 15 hours a week on client communications to spending 4 hours a week, with better results and happier clients. But the real victory wasn't the time savings or the improved client satisfaction. The real victory was what Marcus said when he called to debrief the project. "Dad, I think I understand now why you chose sustainability over scale. It's not because scale is bad, and it's not because you don't understand growth strategies. It's because when you focus on sustainability, you end up building things that actually solve problems instead of building things that look impressive." "What do you mean?" "I mean that if I'd been thinking about scale, I would have tried to build Sarah a system that could handle 100 clients across 20 different types of projects, because that would have been more impressive and more valuable if she wanted to grow. But Sarah doesn't have 100 clients. She has 12 clients across 3 types of projects. She needed a solution for the business she has, not the business she might want to have someday." He paused. "And the solution for the business she has is simpler, cheaper, more reliable, and more effective than the solution for the business she might want to have someday." And I think most business problems are like that. They look complicated because we assume they need to be solved at scale, but they're actually simple if you focus on solving them well for the specific situation. That's when I knew Marcus was ready for the next level. Over the next 6 months, Marcus took on 8 more projects, each one a little more complex, each one a little less supervised, each one building his confidence and competence in sustainable business practices, but more importantly, each one building his understanding of what sustainable business was actually for. The turning point came with the Rodriguez family. Miguel Rodriguez owned a small construction company that specialized in residential remodeling. Good work, fair prices, steady clients. But Miguel was 62 years old, his knees were shot from 30 years of construction work, and his son Eduardo had just graduated from college with a business degree and ideas about modernizing the company. Sound familiar? Eduardo wanted to expand into commercial construction, hire more crews, bid on bigger projects. Miguel wanted to finish out his career doing good work for clients he'd known for decades, then retire knowing the business could continue without him. They'd been arguing about it for 8 months when Miguel called. "I heard you help family businesses figure out succession planning," he said. "My son thinks I'm holding him back, and I think he's trying to fix something that isn't broken. Can you help us figure out who's right?" I assigned the project to Marcus. Not because it was routine, it was actually one of the more complex situations we'd encountered, but because I suspected that spending 8 weeks working with a father and son who disagreed about the future of their family business might teach Marcus some things that couldn't be learned from textbooks or case studies. Marcus spent the first 2 weeks just listening to Miguel talk about the satisfaction of completing projects that would last for decades, of working with clients who trusted him to solve problems they didn't understand, of building a reputation that opened doors and created opportunities. Listening to Eduardo talk about the frustration of working for a company that could be making more money, serving more clients, creating more jobs, having more impact, about watching his father's expertise and relationships get underutilized because the business model was too small to fully leverage them. "They're both right," Marcus told me after those first 2 weeks. "Miguel has built something valuable and sustainable that serves his goals and his values. Eduardo has identified legitimate opportunities that could create more revenue and serve more people. The problem isn't that one of them is wrong. The problem is that they're trying to solve different problems." "What do you mean?" "Miguel is trying to solve the problem of how to finish his career with dignity and pass on something valuable to his son. Eduardo is trying to solve the problem of how to build a business that matches his ambitions and his education. Those aren't the same problem." "So what's the solution?" "I think the solution is to help them understand that they're not actually in conflict. They just need different solutions." Marcus spent the next 4 weeks developing what he called a parallel succession plan. Miguel would continue running the residential remodeling business exactly as he'd been doing, but with systems and processes that Eduardo could eventually take over. Eduardo would start a separate commercial construction business, using Miguel's reputation and relationships as a foundation, but building something that matched his own goals and approach. 2 businesses instead of 1. Father and son as collaborators instead of competitors. Shared resources, shared reputation, but different strategies and different measures of success. It was brilliant, and it worked. But what impressed me most wasn't the cleverness of the solution. What impressed me was how Marcus had arrived at it. "I kept trying to figure out who was right," he told me as we debriefed the project.